United Nations Counter-Terrorism Committee Executive Directorate. Prior to her work at the CTED, she is a fellow of the International Centre for Transitional Justice, a consultant with the Danish Embassy in La Paz, Bolivia, and a senior staff attorney at the Supreme Court of the city of Buenos Aires, Argentina. She also works as an attorney in the Inter-American Courts of Human Rights and at the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, both under the umbrella of the Organization of American States. Celia holds a Doctor of Science of the Law degree and a Master of Science of the Law from Stanford Law School, as well as a Juris Doctor degree from the University of Buenos Aires, Argentina. Welcome, Margaret.
Thank you very much, Tsugoji. And first I'll start by thanking you and thanking the organizers for inviting CTED. As you got a little bit of background about myself, I'm a human rights lawyer and I was trained in Argentina, my home country. Argentina has faced terrorism in a very different setting in the 70s, and Latin America itself, and I wrote a dissertation on state terrorism in Latin America. And I think there are many, many lessons, this is beyond my work at the United Nations, that can be drawn from our experience in Latin America, vis-a-vis what's happening today in Africa and elsewhere on the issue of terrorism and how to, most likely how to promote dialogue and how to stop engaging of young minds into terrorist causes. But today, I'm going to speak, and my speech is going to be a little bit more technical and a little bit less passionate, unfortunately. But I'm going to be basically briefing you on what is the United Nations Counterterrorism Framework, which is quite complicated. I'll try to be as brief as possible. And I'll tell you about what my committee is the Counterterrorism Committee Executive, and I work for the Executive Directorate. It is a subsidiary body of the Security Council of the United Nations. And we have a very broad mandate, basically to monitor the implementation of two flagship resolutions adopted by the Security Council vis-a-vis countering terrorism. I'm going to be referring to the two of them and the difference between the two. And it's not only monitoring states' implementation, but also establishing where are the gaps in the counterterrorism infrastructure of the governments, of the states worldwide, and to facilitate the provision of technical assistance to states that are in need. So for some assistance to, say, for instance, amend legislation, or to train law enforcement agents vis-a-vis on how to prosecute, on how to basically investigate terrorism cases, also providing training for judges and for prosecutors. We do not provide the technical assistance ourselves, we facilitate it. We put donors together with states in need or interested in getting that assistance. So, and I'm also going to talk briefly about the initiative that were recently adopted since 2010 vis-a-vis promotion of dialogue in the African continent. So I'm going to be very general in the approach, but I would welcome specific questions afterwards. So as you may be aware of, the Security Council adopted Resolution 1373 in 2001 in the aftermath of the terrorist attacks of September 11 in New York City, Pennsylvania, and Washington, D.C. That resolution called for United Nations member states to prevent the financing of terrorism, to bring terrorists to justice, and to promote international cooperation and mutual legal assistance vis-a-vis the prosecution of terrorist acts. If you read the resolution, it's a very hardcore resolution, mostly geared to law enforcement agents, judges, and prosecutors and the criminal justice system. 4 years later, in 2005, after the London bombing attacks, the Security Council adopted another flagship resolution for our committee, which is 1624. This resolution presents a radical change from that kind of hardcore, more law enforcement, criminal justice system approach to countering terrorism, because it actually basically calls for the prevention, prohibition, and countering of incitement to commit terrorist acts. If you look into the issue of incitement, you could easily also tie it to recruitment, which is another preventive offense that states are required to codify in their penal laws in order to create an infrastructure to deal with terrorism. Incitement to commit terrorist acts is a very difficult element to define. Of course, it speaks, when we talk about incitement and recruitment, our focus is most likely on the issue of spreading ideas and on the issue of how to counter the conditions that are conducive to the spread of terrorism. So it could be argued that there is a shift in paradigm between these two resolutions, even though it's not that dramatic, but from a law enforcement paradigm into a more preventive paradigm. This more preventive paradigm, if we're talking about preventing, prohibiting, and countering incitement to commit terrorist acts, would require, by definition, more of a only, say, a law enforcement approach. It would require a whole of government approach. So in our engagement, in our dialogue with states, my committee, the Counterterrorism Committee, actually tries to engage with, for instance, ministries of education, ministries of religious affairs, ministry of culture, and the media, civil society. And this is something that under the umbrella of the United Nations Security Council is not that common. So we have a real interesting opportunity as seated, the committee that I represent here, to engage with other actors within the countries and at a regional level as well. In 2006, the General Assembly, not the Security Council, but the General Assembly that has, of course, a more representative nature within the United Nations, adopted what is called the United Nations Global Strategy Against Terrorism. And in that global strategy, it was advised that states should adopt, if interested, comprehensive and integrated strategies to counter terrorism. By comprehensive and integrated, also the paradigm of prevention is very much present. So I'm just going to basically very briefly tell you what CETAD in particular has been doing together with another body of the United Nations, that is the Counterterrorism Implementation Task Force, which is a coordinating body within the UN, to basically promote one of the Ds that Ugoji mentioned in the previous panel, which is dialogue. So as the United Nations, we are uniquely positioned in a sense to get the relevant actors within states and across states to talk. And we're not offering the solutions just to create a forum in which the relevant actors get together and talk and devise policies and devise what's wrong, what's right, what can work and what cannot work. So we've tried to facilitate that dialogue. I'm going to refer to what we call workshops that we have conducted in Africa since 2011. We call them 1624 workshops because they are based on, or they're premised on monitoring states' implementation of the resolution related to incitement, but we also do incorporate the perspective of recruitment. And in convening these workshops, in facilitating these workshops, we have tried to reach out to the states and ask them to provide participants to these workshops that represent not only the Ministry of Justice, judges, lawyers, prosecutors, police officers, border officers, but also to bring together to the table, as I said before, the Ministry of Education, for instance, people in charge of reaching out to communities in the government. And I can tell you that it has been in Africa particularly kind of challenging to, of course, shift the security paradigm into other areas of government that are not necessarily dealing with security, because the Ministry of Education, for instance, or the Ministry of Culture might promote dialogue, might promote understanding among the civilizations within one nation, but might want to be sort of like linked to the more hardcore security paradigm that talking about counterterrorism might, imply. So we have found that sort of like problems when trying to ask states to come up with relevant people to come to these dialogues. The dialogues are actually conducted in the States. In Africa, for instance, we have conducted 3 workshops. Actually, 3 workshops, and I'm going to refer to the first one, which was conducted in 2011 in Nairobi, in Kenya, and it gathered member states from the East African region. And so each state was asked to bring, people from the government that I mentioned from a whole of government approach, but we also had invited at the Security Council members of civil society, and that of course has also posed challenges, because when you try to reach out to grassroots organizations, to women's groups, to civil society groups that are, for instance, working on development, that are, for instance, working on deterrence, they don't necessarily want to be involved in issues related to countering violent extremism or to countering terrorism, because they don't want to be labeled as security, sort of like civil society related area. So we also have found that sort of lack of trust between and among government agencies and civil society vis-a-vis adopting the security paradigm. We try not necessarily to call it security paradigm, but it's about countering terrorism, or at least addressing the conditions conducive to the spread of terrorism. So the second workshop took place in 2012 in Rabat, Morocco, and it was geared towards states of the Sahel and the Maghreb. And the more recent one was held a month ago, in 2013, in June, in Algiers, and it was geared towards North African states. We have to say that, as I saw it before, we face many challenges bringing together state and civil society to talk about how to basically counter incitement, how to bring moderate voices to the main light, how to engage the media, as it has been mentioned before, to portray stories that are relevant to society, but that also, like highlight a non-violent message. Also, we have found interesting the possibility of liaising with women's groups. Women's groups have been particularly interested in joining our initiatives, and also in bringing girls to speak, in bringing youth to speak. Another element that I would highlight is this resolution 1624 that I mentioned not only talks about preventing, prohibiting, and countering incitement, but has interesting language. It says basically that states, this is a United Nations resolution, a Security Council resolution, that states should aim at preventing the subversion of educational, cultural, and religious institutions. I would say that this is an unexploited paragraph of the resolution. The Security Council has not done much about it, but when we try to ask states, because we dialogue, we engage in dialogue primarily with states. In the workshops, we also engage civil society. What are they doing to prevent the subversion of educational, cultural, or religious institutions? Most of the time, the responses are law enforcement based. We are conducting surveillance of educational institutions, of religious institutions, of cultural institutions, of sports activities, of clubs, which is, of course, raises, I'm a human rights officer, as it was mentioned before, many human rights concerns to the ground that we're also taking care of, or we're trying to take care of. So that, are the main conclusions of each of the workshops that we have conducted so far is basically that there is, of course, a need for a more engaging dialogue between the parties that I just mentioned, that there is, of course, a challenge that was just mentioned before me, of getting the right people to talk together, how the international community can actually make a contribution by creating a platform that really engages relevant partnerships, because it's easy to engage civil society that work internationally, but it's much more difficult to engage civil society that works locally, and that has a take in the end. I recall that in the previous session it was mentioned the creation of border communities. This is something that we are really working towards also, getting communities on one side of the border and the other side of the border to talk, and to have these people represented in a counter-terrorism Security Council workshop. It's very difficult. So there's an issue of how you label these initiatives as well. So finally, I would just mention that more recently, maybe I'm sure some of you are aware, in the context of the United Nations, there was a presentation made by the Special Envoy to the Sahel region, Romano Prodi, before the Security Council. And what the United Nations has done, I'm not promoting the United Nations, I'm just telling you, has created what is called adopted, the Sahel strategy. So basically, each different agency of the United Nations has put together a list of what to do vis-a-vis the Sahel. And if you read that, it's about the Sahel crisis, spurred by the Malian crisis, but if you read the document carefully, you will see that many of the initiatives deal with the 3Ds, but particularly with dialogue and prevention of incitement and prevention of recruitment. So it's an interesting document to read, and the idea is basically to address what was mentioned before, not to stop Africa being the safe haven that today is. So it's a comprehensive strategy. It not only addresses dialogue, but also addresses how to deal with borders. But from the point of view of my committee, and the questions that I would welcome are more related on how to get the relevant people to talk and what the international community can do better liaise. This is what we have been doing so far, and we look forward. These 3 workshops took place in Africa. There are other workshops across other regions. This is not an African initiative. It's not for Africa. It's a global initiative. But we have to say that, of course, we started with Africa because, as it has been highlighted, today it's really one of our main interests. And we are moving with these workshops right now to the Middle East. And we had just had one workshop in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, organized by us and the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. And we will be having another one later this year in Cairo in cooperation with the League of Arab States. So we are also trying to engage other international organizations that represent and understand better the problems at the regional level. The next step would be to conduct this sort of dialogue at the national level, not at the regional, but also at the national. So the first step would be most likely Kenya later this year. We'll go back to Kenya, but instead of like convening East African states, we'll convene only Kenyan officials and Kenyan civil society and Kenyan media. And we're also trying to get also business, like private sector to talk. It's very difficult to get when you come as Security Council to talk to the business community and have them to talk about preventing incitement and preventing recruitment. What do they have to say about that? But we do believe, and I welcome your comments or your observations, that they do have a say in promoting this deal, the dialogue. And this is what, again, I'm not advertising, I'm just telling you what we've been doing, and we are here also to learn and to hear from you what could be done better. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Celia. I have lots of questions I'll ask you in the question and answer session. Now it gives me great pleasure to introduce Rabbi Avrin Frank, who will talk to us about an initiative which he's currently doing in New York schools. Rabbi, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for this privilege to speak about this most important issue. I'm still in a state of shock after hearing all these reports, terrorism and the attempt to curb it. But I would rather, in my presentation, speak in a more positive tone about a program that has been in operation for about 7 years called the Moment of Silence. And let me explain to you briefly how this works. This is a program mainly geared for public schools, starting from preschool all the way through high school and even in the colleges. And all that has to be done is announce in the morning before the school day starts that the school will be having a minute of silence. And after this minute is over, the school day goes on as usual. And what do the children think about during this minute? They will ask their mother or father. In other words, the parents will be contacted that the school has implemented this program, and will they please discuss with their child what they should think about during this time. The program doesn't stop here, but let's say after a few weeks of this, the children are asked to write letters about how they feel about this program. And the letters are really emotionally and profoundly deep. And as you know, when children write letters, they don't hold anything back like us adults. So whatever they're writing is what they're really feeling and thinking. And we have collected about 600 plus letters so far. And we're also putting together a book with the 50 or 60 best letters, which will be coming out hopefully in a few months. After the letter writing, we have an assembly in the school where we award every child that writes any type of letter a certificate and a prize. And at these assemblies, the children come up, they get their certificate and prize, and some of them make spontaneous speeches about how much they like this program and how much they want it to continue in the school. Some of the letters I want to mention, the contents of some of these letters. Some children write, I think about the people in Trinidad who don't have shoes and clothes. One child writes that I pray for my mother that she should come home safely from the subway. Several children have written praises to the principal that instituted the program, and they say, we hope it goes on forever in the school. um, a little insight into early child education will explain a little more how important this program is for children in public schools and in any institution. Education is not merely gathering children together and teaching them facts. That is the least part of education. The main part of education is to reveal and bring out the child's inner abilities and to form his character traits, his personality. That is the job of the educator. Every child has his own unique character traits that he's been blessed with. And if they are not developed and brought out, so they remain dormant, and the child never realizes and feels these abilities and grows up as many, unfortunately, children today grow up like people who are almost not human. If someone grows up in an environment where the parents are not involved with them and don't develop these character traits and don't get involved with the child's education and their welfare, so there's no surprise how children like this grow up. Now, basically, people have two types of tracks in their personality. One are the natural character traits. Now, everyone, when they're born, has negative character traits, which have to be supervised, monitored, and corrected eventually, either by the parent or professional person. And it goes without saying that when these character traits are corrected, and the child realizes this, when he grows up, he will thank his parents profusely for doing that, and for bringing him and guiding him and bringing the necessary help to help him overcome these negative character traits. Now, and also on this level, a child is also needed to help develop what is right and wrong in life, his morals, and this also must be developed by the parent. And when the child is guided the right way by the parents, so then he naturally develops morality and he knows what's right and what's wrong. But this is not enough, because one day a child could think that this is right, and another day he could think intellectually that something else is right. As we've seen in history in the 40s, where the Germans, who were the most civilized, industrialized, scientific country in the world, were also the people who led the most bestial acts ever recorded in human history. And they supposedly were the most ethical, most civilized people. So just knowing what's by yourself intellectually, what's right and wrong, is not enough to develop the right character traits and morality in life. But what's also needed is that every child, every human being has the potential to know what is the absolute truth. And when the parent develops this, together with his developing the natural character traits, then the child is on the way to growing up to be a normal, healthy child, spiritually, psychologically, emotionally, and on every level. When this is not done, then the results, of course, are obvious. The relationship, but before we get into that, I just want to briefly mention the results of this campaign. We have now over 1,100 schools around the world that are doing Moment of Silence. We have in America about 150. We have in South Africa over 1,000 schools. And we expect to get more. We have a contact in South Africa who has been implanted there for over 20 years, who has very big contacts in the government, and we expect to get many more schools there. I just want to repeat, if I didn't say this before, this program is absolutely free. Nothing has to be done except announce in the morning that the school's having a minute of silence, and the parent, it discusses with the child what they have to think about during this time. Besides schools, we're also getting emails from drug rehabilitation centers, psychiatric institutes, and universities. And as we know today, there is a thirst in the world, America, we know for sure, on how to correct these massive problems. The ultimate preventive antidote is the all-encompassing cognizance of human accountability, that there's an eye that sees and an ear that hears. A superior being, you can call him whatever you want, and this is the foundation of all later child development and teenage development and all other development. If a child grows up with this recognition that there's someone or something he has to account to, a superior being, then many problems, if not all problems of the world, can be solved. But when someone grows up without this value, and he thinks he can think and say and do whatever he wants, so you see the results today in the world. A child, it doesn't matter how many policemen you put on a child, or how many gun laws you pass. We see they pass gun laws, and right after that we hear of another massacre at a college. So what good was all the gun laws? What was all the money spent, the millions of dollars that Mayor Bloomberg spent on gun laws? What good did it all do? Because a child or a teenager can outsmart all the police. Doesn't matter how many police you put on him. And this program is a preventive antidote. You know, there's two cures to a sickness. One is when the person gets his sickness and goes to the doctor, and the doctor cures him. The other way to cure a sickness is the better one, the preventive way. We can prevent the incarceration of people and drug addiction and juvenile delinquency just by simply implementing this simple program. This wasn't invented by me. This program was invented by an expert educator who is known worldwide for his humanitarian efforts, his educational efforts. He was an engineer at the University of the Sorbonne in Paris with I don't know how many PhDs. He's a recognized authority on every topic in the world. The IDF comes to him, the Israeli Defense Forces come to him for advice. And he tells them secrets that they don't even know. And the mayors have gone to him, presidents have gone to him for advices. And he was a supervisor in the Brooklyn Navy Yard for submarines. He has patents on submarine warfare. This is a rabbi who sits in his office all day, and he gets thousands of questions and queries from people all over the world, from all walks of life. He is an expert in human psychology and education. And it's his suggestion that the only way to solve these massive problems is to recognize, first and foremost, and implant in every child, starting from the school day in the morning, the recognition that there's an eye that sees and an ear that hears. And no one can do whatever they want and say whatever they want, because if that is the story, then you have the unfortunate state of society that you have today. And as many people want to avert the issue and want to pass gun laws, or they want to pass all kinds of laws which avert the problem. This is the main problem. And this simple program has been getting fantastic results. We have letters from principals. We have a principal right here who implemented the moment of silence, Mr. Solomon Long, and he can tell you that it brought dramatic results to the school without money. Doesn't cost a single penny. There's no excuse for any school or any government in the world not to implement this program immediately. It's not an issue to sit around the negotiating table with boards of directors and chairmen and have debates while children every day are being emotionally abused and educationally